it was really important to me to come and do an event in Sydney because I grew up here. This is my home, and you're all my people. So I really wanted to share this all with family and friends and colleagues as well. So thank you so much for making the effort to come out on a Sunday afternoon, rainy and cold, but what better way to spend it than with a glass of wine in your hand and a good book to read, hopefully. So I did want to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we're gathered, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Since leaving Sydney, I had a little introduction to Aboriginal culture when I was growing up in Western Sydney with the Darug people. They actually really took me under their wing, and I learnt a bit there, but I learnt so much more when I left this place and went to Central Australia and lived and worked in Alice Springs for 10 years, which is where I met the lovely Mike, who was the cameraman at ABC out there when I first went there, and loved the place so much that I came back to Sydney for a little bit, then went to London, and then drawn back like an umbilical cord back to Alice Springs for 7 years. And that's where I met my husband, Sean, who is obviously not here today, but has been very supportive along the book journey as well. So, and now I live in Gimoy, Cairns. So again, have the beautiful immersion in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander culture up there.
Right.
So it's good to be back. This is a place where I have a couple of memories. Maybe I had too many wines, but I do remember sitting in the front bar a couple of times, and there was a picture of Mulder from the X-Files on the bar, and I remember that's my lasting memory of this place. But when Devon, who was my fixer, looking for a suitable place for
good at fixing. I put that together.
So for those, I think many of you have met Devon, but if you haven't, Devon is my stepson, and he's been in my life a very long time, and I think since you were 5. And he had offered to find the right venue for me, and he says, I've come up with a couple in Glebe, and one's this, and I was like, that's perfect, I know the place intimately, so thank you for that.
Cheers.
And look, every single one of you has got a place in my history, in my story. I could just spend the whole talk telling you all how I know you all, but I'll leave that for after the official bit is done and you can all find out from each other. So one of my favorite things to do is to bring people together. And I love it when people haven't met each other before, but they're part of my history, and then they get together and they hit it off, and then they have a new connection. So hopefully some more of that magic will happen today. But you're not here to hear me talk about my family history. So I want to just celebrate this book with you. This is my Sydney book launch. I was really humbled this morning to do a talk at the Warringah Library, and 15 people said they were coming. I knew one school friend was coming, but ended up having 2. I had Daniel and April there, and then I had 35 people, and there was no more room in the room, and I was completely blown away. I had Nepalis come from Campbelltown who just wanted to come and hear about the story. They were actually Tamang people as well, which is the ethnic group that Som is from. And yeah, it just keeps reinforcing to me that this was the right thing for me to do. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how this all happened, because some of you may know, but maybe some of you don't know how this all happened. So I've been a journalist for 30 years, and 15 years of that was spent with the ABC. And my whole motivation for becoming a journalist wasn't crime or politics or disaster or any of those things. It was always people. I always wanted to tell people's stories. I didn't know that I was going to write a book one day, but I guess it's a natural evolution. But it's so different. We're so used to the instant gratification of doing radio and TV news every day. It's done, it's dusted, you move on, you can see what you've made, and there's a satisfaction in that. The ego is very happy. The book is not like that, as you will know, Jane, because Jane's an accomplished author and has been through this process a few times. It's quite lonely, isn't it? Sometimes you think you're sitting with this thing for a year, maybe 2 years, maybe a lot longer than that. And you have a lot of self-doubt, You wonder if anyone's going to read it. You wonder if anyone's going to resonate with it. And it's really a vulnerable situation to put yourself in, particularly if it's not your story. This is no work of fiction. This is somebody's life, and it's a life that I wanted to honour. So I'm at the ABC. I eventually moved from Central Australia to Cairns with the ABC, and in 2015, something pretty dramatic happened. On the 25th of April, Anzac Day for us, there was a devastating earthquake and 9,000 people died in Nepal. So I think I might just start by reading a little bit of that day in history, which is in the book. At 11:56 a.m, without warning, the earth began to wrench violently back and forth from a depth of 15 kilometres. Birds took refuge in the sky as the ground beneath them fell away. For 50 seconds, the most powerful earthquake to hit Nepal since 1934 shook the country to its core. Mother Nature's pulse could be felt well beyond Nepal's borders in India, Bhutan, Bangladesh and Tibet. In Kathmandu, 80 kilometres south-east of the earthquake's epicentre in the Gorkha district, people ran frantically from cars, shops and homes, desperate to find a clear space to avoid the flying debris as buildings gave way. The destructive force of severe magnitude 7.8 quake tore huge cracks in the roads, large enough to swallow cars. As the clouds of dust settled, a buzz of nervous excitement rose among those left standing. There was a frenzy of voices shouting into mobile phones as people took to social media to relay the news to family and friends and check they were out of harm's way. Hastily abandoned bikes and cars could not be found again, and everywhere you turned, there was a splintered mess of wood, twisted metal and concrete piled up on mountains of red bricks. The awful reality began to set in. Crushed, lifeless bodies lay shrouded in dust, and desperate moans emanated from the rubble as thousands lay dying or severely injured, limbs twisted and faces contorted like the fallen buildings that surrounded them. Beyond the capital, in Nepal's mountain communities, people watched in horror as the earthquake triggered devastating landslides and avalanches along the Himalayan range. Each one came with a sickening crack, followed by the roar of tons of earth descending at speed. For Som Tamang, an unimaginable loss was unfolding in his village of Batasi, high in the hills northeast of Kathmandu. In just a few moments, his life's work had been reduced to rubble. The Nepalese Australian had come from nothing. He'd overcome child slavery and crippling poverty to make a new life for himself in Australia and ensure Batasi's children would not have to suffer as he did. He'd fought so hard to give children access to education in his village, but now the local school was gone. The hostel built by Som's humanitarian organisation, Friends of Himalayan Children, was rendered uninhabitable. Another hostel Som had bought with his own money so older students could continue their secondary education in a village several hours away also disappeared in a cloud of dust. Millions of Nepali, including most of Som's community, were now homeless. His campaign to stop human trafficking and end child marriage had been dealt a huge blow. How could he possibly come back from this? So that was the context in which I met Som on a couple of days after the earthquake in 2015. And he was on his way back to Nepal, knowing that all of the focus would be on Kathmandu, on the tourist areas, the Himalayas, because they're very reliant on that trekking industry, to Everest Base Camp, Annapurna. So that's where the money was going to go. And he thought, if I don't help and get rice and supplies and medical aid to the places in between, then those people are going to die. So off he went, and I did the first story with him. And then he came back, and no sooner had he got back that there was another earthquake and more disaster. So whatever the first earthquake didn't take, the second one did. So there was even greater need. So it became a more concerted fundraising campaign in Cairns, and that's how I became a bit more involved. So I followed his story for months with him going back and forth, and I began to know a little bit more about him. He doesn't talk much about him or himself or his life, but I learned more about his charitable work and became really interested in that and on board with what he was doing. I've always believed in the power of education, and what he was doing was actually changing lives by giving children in his village access to education So Som, as a 10-year-old, his school only went to grade 5. So at that point, he had to leave and go to another village to pursue his education. And he was so keen to make it happen for himself that when a village uncle said to him, "Oh, I've got a family in Kathmandu, they will look after you, you will be adopted to them, and you will go to school," he went, "Fantastic." So he didn't even tell his parents he was going, just packed a bag and off he went in the dead of night. And they walked to Kathmandu, and he was dropped off with this family of strangers that he didn't know. And an unfortunate reality began to unfold. He kept asking about school, and they said, "Oh, not yet, not yet." And his life for the next 2 years became one of essentially working for them, cooking, cleaning, taking their children to school, and never having time for his own education. He was made to sleep under the stairs in a condition that he describes as worse than we would treat our dogs here. And humiliated as well, being from a Tamang cultural background. There was a caste system in place in Nepal, and even though it's no longer enshrined in law, there's still those prejudices there. So he was seen as not worthy of using the same toilet as the family, not worthy of sleeping in a bed, etc. So he endured this for 2 years, and then eventually escaped and made his way back to Batasi. So that really kind of was the fire in his belly to start investing not only in his education, but mainly his siblings, his younger siblings and girls. When he went to school, there were hardly any girls that got to go. It was only for boys. Girls were meant to get married early, have children, look after their in-laws, and do farming. That was the career for women in rural Nepal. And he always thought that was wrong. And he also watched a lot of girls disappear and not to come back. And then when he was in Kathmandu, he realized that something quite sinister was happening to them, that many of them were actually being sent off to India and taken to brothels. And if they made it back to the village, it was generally when they were of no use anymore, when they were HIV positive or had other illnesses that rendered them useless for that industry, and their families didn't want them because there was enormous amounts of shame. So they were left kind of in limbo. And Som didn't want that for his sister Fulmaya or the other children in his village. So he started working hard to support their education. First, he started with his younger siblings, and he was a labourer, and he was carrying lots of heavy things, because if you go to these villages, you realise that they have incredible strength. You might think that it's cruel to see girls with bags on their back taking people to Everest Base Camp, but they just laugh at you because they're carrying more than their body weight in millet and grass and things like that every day in the village. So they're incredibly strong and agile people. And Som, when he was doing construction in Kathmandu, realised there were other Nepalis who were working in the trekking industry, and he thought that looked like a pretty good deal. And that's where he met Mel, who I'm finally meeting for the first time in person today. And he decided that it was a much easier way to be able to support his family than the labouring, so it's quite lucrative. And the prospect of having an adventure, meeting people from around the world was pretty interesting to him. He had his first contact with foreigners many years before. As you'll read in the book, he had quite a severe head injury when he was a child. He actually fell from the second story onto something sharp, and his parents didn't expect him to live. He basically walked around with this open head wound for almost a year, and it wasn't until some people got lost and ended up in his village that they gave him some antibiotics or some medicine, and it actually healed up finally, and he thought, right, well, I'm going to survive. And that was his first kind of contact with foreigners, and he realized that there was a whole world out there and that people could be kind, and he wanted to be kind himself, and he wanted to give back. So his interest had already been piqued at that young age. And then, of course, when he was in Tamil, seeing all these tourists there, he's like, I want a piece of that action. That looks pretty good. And am I right in saying that Som's a pretty charismatic guy? He's got a bit of influence in terms of...
Charisma.
Yeah. yeah, he's a person you really can't say no to. And despite some of his methods being unorthodox, you kind of trust him as well to get the job done. So he's someone that makes things happen. And so I'm just going to read you another little bit of the story. Maybe not the cliffhanger bit, but just maybe when you guys met. Alrighty. Okay, so this is quoting you. In Kathmandu, everyone's trying to find a Westerner with money, Malcolm said. Som stood out. He had an open heart, a twinkle in his eye, and a big grin. His English was good, and he just asked me what I was doing. There was an energy there and a friendship that immediately happened. Before long, Som had convinced Malcolm to hire him as a guide to travel to the Everest region. He talked up his strength, gesturing to the backpackers around them and telling Malcolm he could carry 5 bags at once. Malcolm said he was interested in making a film while they were up in the mountains, so Som took him to a shop in Kathmandu to buy extra camera equipment for their expedition, and they also gathered other supplies for the trip. Malcolm was paying for everything from an envelope stuffed with around $15,000 US in cash and traveller's checks, as there were no ATMs. He then discovered the envelope was missing after their shopping trip. He was suspicious of his new companion, telling Som he now had no means to pay for the trip or the film. Som got angry with Malcolm and asked if he believed him to be a thief. Som said, "If you don't trust me, don't go trekking with me. You can go with people you trust. Why would I steal your money? I'm going with you for the next 2 weeks." Som agreed to help Malcolm find the lost funds. They retraced their steps across Kathmandu, going from shop to shop. The envelope had been left at the camera shop and held for safekeeping by an attendant. The money was returned to Malcolm, and from that moment he knew he could trust Som. The new friendship had withstood its first test. I'll just read on just a little bit. They bought a plane ticket to Lukla, one of the world's most dangerous airports, with a short, steep runway dwarfed by the high peaks surrounding it. They took a taxi to Kathmandu Airport, and Malcolm noticed the driver was also marketing himself as a wedding photographer. He told the taxi driver he'd hire him as a cameraman for his short film when they returned from Everest. When their small plane touched down at Lukla, Som revealed to Malcolm it was his first time trekking in the region. He'd never been to Everest Base Camp before, and he would need to make inquiries about which tea houses they could stay along the way. So, he's a bit of a chancer, the old Som, but he got the job done, didn't he? He got you there and got you back. And yes, that other story you can read about in the book. But needless to say, he just managed to have enough charm, enough street cred, enough contacts to essentially change the course of his own life and the course of many others after him. So long story short, Mel recommends to his friend Jason Clark, who's also coming to Kathmandu for a shoot, to hire Som as a guide. And then during their time together, Som asks Jason if he would mind writing him a reference to come to Australia. There's also a woman involved around about this time, which you'll read in the book, is how he actually finally got to Australia, but it was with the help of that reference from Jason as well, that Som got to come to Australia and finally finish his education. And once he did that, he had the means to help not just his own family, but many more kids in the village. And of course, now there's hundreds of children benefiting from his work through the Friends of Himalayan Children and Take on Nepal. So he started a trekking company that was focused on women trekking guides, which is quite groundbreaking in Nepal. Most of the Himalayan treks, you'll just see male porters, male guides. But he saw no reason why women shouldn't have a slice of that pie. They were strong, they were fit, they were reliable. And so he created a new industry for his village for the women. So it was a great joy for me in 2018. I haven't told you much about my story because I think most of you know that I went through a bit of a breakdown in 2016 when I was at the ABC. And by now I was invested in Som's work and Som's story and started to sponsor the first of 3 girls. So I decided that I would go and volunteer in the village for a month in 2016. And at that point, coming back after seeing the impact that he was having on those girls and boys and the change he was making, I went, this is incredible. I need to write your story. But I needed to go and get the interviews for that. So it was 2 years after that I went back to Nepal. I ended up trekking to Everest Base Camp. Not that I had ever wanted to, but I thought this is the only way I'm going to get to spend time with Som, even though he lives in Cairns. He's very hard to pin down. So we had time together and I was able to immerse myself in his world. And a great joy was many of the girls who I'd taught 2 years before were now the trekking guides that accompanied us to Everest Base Camp. And I was like, this is all working really well for him and for the village. So I couldn't not write the story. So that was a long time ago. 2016 is when I first decided I wanted to write the story, and it's taken till 2024 to make it happen. A couple of important things happened along the way. So I knew that I couldn't actually get this done without spending the time to do it. So I continued in the workforce, eventually left the ABC, went to work for Queensland Health, but my husband, Sean, he knew that it was niggling at me, and he said, if you don't leave the workforce for a while and actually write this book, it's going to be a regret of your life. So we saved a bit of money so I could leave the workforce. And at the point after I decided to do that, I ended up getting a grant from the Cairns Regional Council, the Regional Art Development Fund, to help me write the book. So I thought that's a sign from the universe that I'm doing the right thing. And the second bit of good fortune happened last year. So I wrote the book. It was finished at the end of 2021, and I spent 2 years knocking on doors of publishers, using all my contacts to try and get introductions and try and get a little bit of leverage to be noticed, because it's quite a brutal industry. And I tried about 30 publishers, and they all, the ones that bothered to respond said, great story, well written, an amazing, amazing journey, amazing human being, but no thank you. They didn't think it would be commercially viable for them. And I thought, surely, that's not just they're not the only books that get out there. There's got to be one, people who write stories about people who are relatively unknown that are worthy of publishing. And Elizabeth McLean thought so. This is a woman who lives in Fernvale, southeast Queensland, and she came across last August, she came across an article that Som and I had done for the ABC about this book. And she asked me where she could get it. And I said, well, it's not published yet. Haven't been able to get a publisher, and I don't have the money to self-publish. And she was so invested in the story, so keen to support Som and to support me, both complete strangers to her, that she sent me a check in the mail. And that is why this book is now in print, because I was able to self-publish it. So it's a really nice story for me as well. It's been a privilege to write, and I am thrilled with the feedback that I'm getting from people who've read it. A lot of people are just sending me messages after a day saying, it's done, I couldn't put it down, and now I've lent it to a friend. And I really hope that it inspires people to think about their own life, that they consider, what else could I be doing? And I actually thought that I was at the end of the road with my own life, and this has given me another life. This has given me another purpose, and I couldn't be more grateful for that opportunity. It's a huge responsibility to tell someone else's story, and I'm really grateful to Som for allowing me to do that. It's not been easy, but it's been worth it, and I'm really proud to share it with you, and thank you all for being here to do that with me. So thank you.
Yeah.
So really, it's open to you to ask some questions if you have any of me, or share any insights that you have. Yes, Jane.
What's your next book?
It's a question. It's a question that I get asked every time I speak, and the answer is the same. I think my husband Sean and my business partner Susie will probably not allow me to do that for some time. I'm sure that you're feeling the pain there, Mike. It takes a lot out of you. You become a bit of a hermit. I was getting all these taps on the door at 9:30 at night. Do you reckon you could maybe wrap it up for the day? It's a long process. I would love to write another book, but as you probably know, financially it's not sustainable as a full-time activity. It's something that we do very much for the love and because we feel called to do it. So I may write a book about my own life in my retirement. And of course, I'd love to write some more of these rich biographical stories, but I can't see that happening in the next 10 years.
I have a really good writing coach.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So just talk to me after.
Okay. Who allows you to find an extra 8 hours in your day? Very good. Yeah, no, I love the process, but I do run my own business now, video and media training company, and that brings me great joy as well. I get to go all around the country teaching people how to make videos on their smartphone and speak to the media. So that's a real passion of mine as well. But yeah, maybe one day there'll be another book.
What was the most challenging part of this journey?
There was a point right at the end that I didn't think it was going to happen. I had someone investing in the book. I had all the ducks lined up. I'd lined up the publisher. And then, Som went to ground on me. And I thought, he's been here for the whole journey, but I think he's getting a bit scared now. So he held out. I wanted to do everything properly and get consent from everybody in the book in writing. It was all I had all verbal consent from everyone. Mel knows because I was chasing him down for a consent form. And there's over 50 people in the book, and a lot of them are in rural Nepal. They don't have computers. They don't speak English. And that is a hell of a challenge to get everyone's written consent. So that's probably the most challenging part of the process, is to think you've come all this way, you've got this thing, you've finally got the means to do it, and it could all fall over because you can't get a few signatures. So I'm very grateful to a few people in Som's village, and unfortunately one of those just suddenly passed away, BJ, for helping facilitate that, actually taking those forms, sitting down with Som's mum and dad, getting them to do a thumbprint because they don't have a signature, and getting that consent from every person that I've met that I've mentioned in the book. So that was the most challenging part of the process and how I overcame it.
It sounds a little bit like Som might also saved your life.
In a way, he did. He did. I remember Som saying to me, because we sat down a couple of times before I went to volunteer, and he said, look, Kirsty, there's no mental health problems in Batassi. He said people go to the village and whatever they're carrying, they can let go of. And it was so true. I went over there on my own at a very, very vulnerable time, but I just had to do something. I had to shift something for something to change in my life. And I got a tattoo on my arm, which is covered up because it's winter, which basically is my daily indication to myself that if you change nothing, nothing will change. So I got out of my comfort zone. I went there. He was not there at the time. We crossed over by about 4 hours one day, which is when I filmed an interview with him for an ABC TV story. But yeah, it was really his encouragement to say, why don't you go to the village and volunteer? And I said, oh, okay, well, what do you want me to do? I can cook, I can try and build stuff. I'll do whatever needs to be done. And he said, I want you to teach journalism. He said, anybody can go and do those other things, but I want you to talk to the kids about how this works and use it as a vehicle for English. And that's what I ended up doing. And yeah, it did save my life. I acknowledge that in the book. So if I hadn't had that purpose again, I don't know what the future would have been for me. When I checked out of the ABC that year on my leave, I'd got to the point where I was just staring at my computer screen and I didn't even know how to turn the thing on. That's how bad it got. And I was like, if I do any other job, it's probably going to be something menial like putting stickers on the fruit, although I think even a robot does that now, so I would have done a better job. But I honestly just didn't think that I had anything left to give. So yeah, he gave me a lot by giving me this opportunity, and hopefully I've honored that.
So it's like going from the computer back to Android, searching the print.
That's right. And you have to be resourceful. Like, this is a classroom that is dirt floor and tin shed because the earthquake wiped the school out and the kids were wanting to get back to school as soon as possible. They're the most committed to their education of any kids that I've seen. And we've got a teacher in the room, and I'm sure it's hard to motivate the kids sometimes to even come there, let alone want to get there. And I remember my first day teaching there, the kids were all there before the teachers, and it was a holiday time, so the kids and the teachers had been with their families, and some of the teachers just didn't bother coming back because it was going to be a weekend for the sake of a day or two. So instead of shadowing someone my first day, they put me in the classroom, and I've never taught before. So I brought some resources from Australia. I'd made some crosswords, and I'd bought some props from home that I could talk about. And of course, you can teach songs. But by the third class, there were hardly any teachers left. They'd all checked out for the day, but there was still a few kids. So they put all of these kids in the classroom from kindergarten to year 10. So I'm like, what am I going to teach 5 to 17-year-olds? And I thought, you know what? I'm a dance teacher. We're going to do a salsa lesson. So I took them all outside and we did a salsa lesson. So yeah, made you pretty resourceful because you weren't relying on playing videos and teaching on computers and whatnot.
Good.
Yeah. And I'd do it all again. Any one of us can go and volunteer in Batasi and many other places in Nepal if that's something that you think that you might want to do. And it was really a valuable experience. I came home and I spoke to my stepson Leon, and I said, I would really love you to go and have this experience because it just changes so much. I came back from there thinking, why do we need all this stuff? Why are we driving around in cars, and why do we need everything that beeps? It really annoyed me. So I just wanted to get really minimalist when I came home. But yeah, you eventually fall into your old comforts and whatnot. But we're going in October for the first time since 2018. Sean has never been there before, so I'm thrilled that we'll both get to spend some time in Batasi, and we'll probably come back and want to sell everything and get rid of it all and live out the backyard after that. Thank you.